The rain poured endlessly over the small town of Windermere, a quiet place that seemed forgotten by time. Streetlights flickered through the mist, and the only sign of life came from a small diner at the end of the street, Moonshade Diner. Its glowing sign buzzed faintly, lighting up the puddles outside like scattered pieces of silver. Inside, Alara wiped the counter with a soft cloth, humming to herself. She was young but looked tired, the kind of tired that came not from age but from life's weight. Her eyes, however, were gentle and bright. She had worked at the diner for years, serving the same few customers who came every night. Nothing ever changed here, and that was what she liked. It was safe, predictable. But that night felt different. There was a chill in the air, the kind that made the hairs on her arms rise. The clock ticked past 10, the time she usually locked up. The streets outside were empty, and she was about to turn off the open sign when the bell above the door chimed softly. Alara froze. A tall man stepped inside, dressed in a long black coat that glistened with raindrops. He moved like the rain itself, quiet, graceful, and cold. His eyes were deep and unreadable, the color of storm clouds. But what caught Alara's attention most wasn't him. It was the small boy who followed silently behind. The boy looked fragile, almost too pale for life. His hair was silver white, his skin almost translucent, and his eyes, a strange shade of pale blue, carried an emptiness that made Alara's chest tighten. He looked around the diner like he was seeing it for the first time, yet too scared to belong. The tall man approached the counter. His voice was calm, low, and steady. 2 cups of warm milk, he said, and if you have something sweet for the boy. Alara nodded quickly. Of course. She tried to smile, though her hands trembled slightly. Something about this man's presence was different. Not dangerous exactly, but heavy, like the air itself bent around him. As she turned to the coffee machine, she heard the faintest whisper, or maybe it was her imagination, the sound of the man sighing almost sadly. The boy sat by the window staring out into the rain. He didn't touch the menu. He didn't move, just stared. Alara prepared the milk carefully, adding a little honey for warmth. She brought the drinks to their table, setting them down gently. Here you go, she said softly. It's still raining hard out there. You both must be freezing, the man nodded once. Thank you, the boy didn't respond. He only looked at the steaming cup, then glanced up at her, his expression unreadable. She gave him a kind smile. It'll make you feel better, she said gently. For a moment his lips parted like he wanted to speak. But no words came. He just lowered his eyes again. Something inside Alara ached. She had seen lonely people before, truck drivers, wanderers, broken souls passing through. But this child's silence felt different. It wasn't just shyness. It was sorrow, deep and quiet. She returned to the counter but kept glancing their way. The man drank slowly while the boy didn't touch his milk. The silence between them felt endless. After some time, the man stood and placed a few old silver coins on the counter. They didn't look like any money she had seen before, but when she looked up, he was already at the door. The boy followed silently, turning once to glance at her before stepping into the night. Alara stood still for a long while after they left, staring at the door. The diner felt colder now. The next evening, the same thing happened. The rain, the same quiet, and at exactly 10 o'clock the bell chimed again. The man and the boy returned. Alara felt her heart quicken as she saw them walk in. This time she didn't wait for them to order. She smiled softly and said, "Warm milk and something sweet?" The man's lips curved slightly, the smallest hint of surprise. Yes. When she placed the drinks on the table, she crouched a little beside the boy. "Hi there," she said kindly. "I'm Alara. What's your name?" The boy just blinked, then lowered his gaze again. His hands were folded neatly in his lap. He looked like someone who had forgotten how to speak, or was too afraid to try. "It's okay," she added gently. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to." The man watched in silence. His eyes were unreadable but not hostile. After a moment, he said quietly, "He doesn't speak." Alara looked up at him. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "It's all right," the man interrupted. "He hasn't spoken for a very long time." Something about the way he said it, and with such calm sadness, made her heart tighten. The boy looked at her again, his eyes shimmering under the diner's dim light. He seemed to be studying her, like he was trying to understand something about her face, her voice, her kindness. When she smiled again, his hand twitched, almost like he wanted to reach out but didn't dare. That night they stayed longer. The man sipped his drink quietly while the boy drew shapes on the fogged window with his finger, small circles, lines, and stars. When they finally left, the boy turned back and gave a small nod. It wasn't much, but to Alara it felt like the start of something. Days turned into weeks. The mysterious pair came every few nights, always at the same hour, always ordering the same drinks. No one else ever saw them. The town's streets were empty after dark, and sometimes Alara wondered if she was dreaming them. But every morning, the same 2 empty cups on the corner table proved she wasn't. She began to notice things. The man never ate. He never smiled. He never even blinked for long stretches. His skin was pale, too pale, and his voice carried a tone that didn't belong to this time. And the boy? The boy seemed untouched by the world around him. He didn't age. His clothes never changed. One night, Alara dared to ask, "You're not from around here, are you?" The man looked at her for a moment, then replied, "No, we travel a great deal." She nodded, pretending to believe that. But something told her their travels weren't normal. That night, the rain was heavier than usual. The wind howled outside and thunder echoed in the distance. Only the diner's warm light stood against the storm. The man sat quietly at his usual table, staring into nothing, while the boy watched the raindrops slide down the glass. Alara decided to try something. She knelt beside the boy again and said softly, "You know, when I was little, I used to talk to the rain. I'd tell it my secrets and it always listened." She smiled gently. "You can tell it your secrets too if you want." The boy blinked at her. For a moment his lips parted, like he wanted to speak. His small hand lifted slightly, trembling. Then he pressed his palm against the window, tracing the raindrops. Alara whispered, "What's your name?" The boy looked at her, his eyes shining like glass. Then he slowly drew a single letter on the fogged glass. And Alara gasped softly, "Hey, that's the start of your name?" He nodded barely. It was the smallest motion, but it was the first sign of trust. When she looked up, she noticed the man was watching. His eyes weren't cold this time, and they were sad. For a second, they glowed faintly red like embers behind smoke. But when Alara blinked, they were normal again. She didn't speak of it. After they left that night, Alara couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the boy, about that single letter on the glass. A. What did it mean? Why was he so quiet? Why did his father's eyes seem full of ancient sorrow? Something deep inside her told her there was more. Something dark, something hidden. But she wasn't afraid. She just felt drawn to them, especially the child. Maybe, she thought, the boy just needed kindness. Maybe he just needed someone who cared. A few nights later, they came again. The diner was empty except for them. The man sat silently, lost in thought. The boy played with the spoon, spinning it slowly. Alara brought their milk and smiled at him. "I made it extra warm tonight," she said softly. "The weather's getting colder." The boy looked up, and for the first time she saw a tiny spark of light in his eyes. He gave her a small nod. That was all. But it was enough. As she walked back to the counter, she heard the man's quiet voice behind her. "You shouldn't be kind to him," he said. "It will only hurt you." She turned, confused. "Why would it hurt me to be kind?" He looked up at her then, and for a brief, haunting moment his eyes were filled with centuries of pain. "Because some wounds," he said softly, "bring darkness with them." The room fell silent again. Only the sound of rain filled the air. Alara didn't know what he meant. But when she looked at the boy again, small, lonely and silent, she made a quiet promise in her heart. Whatever darkness followed them, she wouldn't let it reach him. She didn't know that. From that very night onward, her kindness would begin to change everything. Even the fate of the Vampire King himself. The next few nights at Moonshade Diner passed quietly, but Alara could not stop thinking about the boy with silver hair and sad eyes. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see him sitting by the fogged window, tracing raindrops with his small fingers. There was something about him that lingered in her heart, something fragile and mysterious. The town of Windmere was peaceful during the day, but lonely at night. Alara lived in a small apartment above the diner. Every evening before work, she would look out her window, hoping to see the strange pair walking through the fog again. She told herself she wasn't waiting for them, but she knew she was. When the bell above the door chimed again 3 nights later, she felt a quiet joy fill her chest. They were back. The man, tall and silent as always, held the door open for the boy whose tiny boots were soaked from the rain. Alara smiled softly. "Welcome back," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "I was starting to think you two forgot about me." The man gave a faint nod but didn't speak. The boy simply looked at her, his pale eyes watching her carefully. Alara noticed that the boy seemed a little more alive this time. There was a small curiosity in his expression. Faint, but there. She brought 2 cups of warm milk and placed a plate of small cookies between them. "Here you go," she said gently. "These are sweet, but not too much. I think you'll like them." The boy blinked and slowly reached for a cookie. He didn't eat it right away, just stared at it as though it were something new. Then, to her quiet happiness, he took a tiny bite. It was such a simple thing, a child eating a cookie, but to Alara, it felt like watching the sun rise after a long winter. After serving the few other customers that night, Alara found herself glancing at their table again. The man's face was unreadable, but the boy seemed calmer than before. When she walked over to refill their milk, she noticed a small wooden figure on the table, a tiny bird carved neatly from pale wood. Her heart skipped. "Oh," she said softly, "that's beautiful. Did you make it?" The boy shook his head quickly and pointed at his father. Alara looked at the man, surprised. "You carve?" The man glanced at the figure for a moment, then said quietly, "It helps. Pass the time." There was a sadness in his tone that made Alara's chest tighten. She wanted to ask more, but something told her not to. Instead, she smiled. "You're very talented. It looks real." The man gave a polite nod. The boy turned the little bird in his hands, looking at it like it was something precious. Alara noticed his small smile, faint but there, and felt warmth spread in her chest. Maybe, she thought, he was starting to feel safe here. Later that night, when the diner was empty except for them, Alara sat at the counter writing in her notebook. She liked to write small stories, about people, about dreams, about the world she wished she lived in. Sometimes writing helped her heart feel lighter. She didn't notice that the boy had walked up quietly until she heard a soft sound, the scrape of a chair being pulled beside her. When she looked up, the boy was standing there holding the small wooden bird. "Oh, hello there," she said gently. "Did you want to show me something?" The boy nodded and placed the bird on the counter. Then he took her pen and paper, looking uncertain. She hesitated for a moment but handed them to him with a smile. He began to draw, slow, careful lines. When he finished, he pushed the paper toward her. It was a drawing of the diner, simple but full of tiny details. The counter, the clock, the window with raindrops. And there, at the corner, was a small figure that looked just like her. Alara felt her throat tighten. "You drew this?" she whispered. He nodded again. His eyes met hers, and for a brief second she saw something in them that took her breath away. A silent cry for understanding, maybe even friendship. "You're amazing," she said softly. "You're really talented." For the first time the boy smiled, just a little but real. It was enough to make her heart flutter. But then she heard the man's voice from across the room. "Aiden," he said quietly, "it's time to go." The boy froze at the sound of his name. Aiden. So that was it. The letter he had written on the window. A. For Aiden. Alara turned, surprised. "That's his name?" The man paused, his eyes on the floor. "It was," he said softly. "Once." Before she could ask what he meant, he turned away. Aiden hesitated, looking back at Alara as though he wanted to stay. She gave him a gentle wave and whispered, "Good night, Aiden." The boy smiled faintly before following his father out into the rain. That night, Alara couldn't sleep again. She sat by her window watching the rain slide down the glass. The name echoed in her mind. Aiden. It suited him. But what did his father mean? It was his name once. Something wasn't right. The man's eyes, his old-fashioned clothes, the strange coins he left behind. Everything about him felt ancient, and Aiden's silence wasn't normal. It felt like something more, like a shadow placed upon him. Alara pressed her hands together. "Who are they?" she whispered to herself. The next evening, she brought something with her to work, a small wooden bird she had carved herself. It was rough and simple, not nearly as fine as the man's carving, but she hoped Aiden would like it. Hours passed before the diner door opened again. When she saw them, her heart lifted. "You came back," she said with a smile. The man gave his usual quiet nod, and Aiden slipped into his seat by the window. His eyes, as always, followed her wherever she moved. When she brought their milk and cookies, she placed the small wooden bird on the table in front of him. "I made this," she said shyly. "It's not perfect, but it's yours." Aiden stared at the figure, his eyes wide. He touched it carefully as if afraid it might vanish. Then slowly he looked up at her, and for the first time there were tears in his eyes. Alara's heart ached. She knelt beside him and whispered, "You don't have to speak, Aiden. I can hear you anyway." The boy's small hands trembled as he held the wooden bird close to his chest. Then he turned to his father, who was watching quietly. For a moment something passed between them, a look, a memory, perhaps even pain. Finally the man spoke softly. "You shouldn't be kind to us." Alara looked up, startled. "Why not?" He met her eyes, his gaze heavy. "Because kindness is dangerous when given to the cursed." The word made her shiver. "Cursed? What do you mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stood and placed payment on the table. "You will understand soon," he said quietly. Then he turned to Aiden. "Come." But the boy didn't move. He held the wooden bird tightly, shaking his head. He didn't want to go. The man's expression softened. For the first time, Alara saw something like sorrow in his eyes, deep and ancient. He sighed and knelt beside his son, whispering something too quiet for her to hear. Aiden finally rose, tears still glimmering in his pale eyes. Before leaving, he looked back at Alara one last time. She smiled gently through her worry. "Goodbye, Aiden. Come back soon, okay?" He gave a small nod and followed his father into the misty night. Hours later, after closing the diner, Alara stepped outside. The streets were silent. She pulled her coat tighter and began walking home when something caught her eye. A shadow by the alley corner. It was him. The tall man. He stood under a streetlight, his face hidden beneath his dark hood. When he saw her, he didn't move. Alara hesitated. "You shouldn't walk around in this weather," she said softly. "You'll get sick." The man's voice was calm but distant. "Sickness does not touch me," she frowned. "You talk like you're not human." He turned his gaze toward her, and for a moment, under the light, his eyes gleamed red. Not bright, not violent, but deep and sorrowful. "Once, perhaps," he said quietly. "Long ago." Alara's breath caught in her throat, but instead of fear, she felt pity. The sadness in his voice was more painful than his words. "Then who are you?" she asked softly. He looked away toward the fog. "Someone who has lived too long. Someone who has lost too much." He turned to leave but stopped, his voice low and almost pleading. "Do not get too close to my son. He carries a silence that was never meant to be broken." And then, before she could speak again, he vanished, melting into the night like mist. Alara stood there for a long time, staring at the empty street. Her heart pounded not from fear but from confusion. Who were they? Why did his eyes glow? What silence did Aiden carry? The rain began again, cold and endless. She lifted her face to the sky, whispering softly to the darkness. "I don't care who you are. The child deserves kindness, and I won't stop giving it." At that very moment, far away in the shadows, Aiden sat awake beside his father in an old carriage, holding the wooden bird close to his chest. His tiny lips trembled as he whispered for the first time in years, too soft for anyone but the wind to hear, "Alara." The following morning came slowly. Gray clouds covered the sky, and the streets of Windmere were quiet after a night of rain. Alara sat by her window, staring at the dripping rooftops below. She hadn't slept much. Her mind kept replaying what happened the night before. The man's glowing eyes, his sad words, and Aiden's tearful face as he clutched the wooden bird. She couldn't forget his voice, or rather the memory of his silence. What had that man meant when he said, "He carries a silence that was never meant to be broken"? Alara sighed and rubbed her tired eyes. She didn't believe in curses, not really, but something about them, the way they appeared at the same time each night, the way the air around them seemed heavier, it made her heart uneasy. Still, she promised herself one thing. She wouldn't turn away from that child. He needed someone to care, and if no one else would, she would. That evening, the diner was quiet again. The bell above the door jingled every now and then when locals came in for coffee, but her heart waited for the sound that mattered. The soft chime of the door at exactly 10 o'clock. But 10 passed. Then 11. No one came. Ilara felt a strange sadness settle over her. She tried to focus on cleaning the tables, but her mind drifted back to the boy. She hoped he was safe wherever he was. As she turned off the open sign and began to lock up, a soft noise made her freeze. The door creaked open. Her heart jumped, and she looked up. It was Aiden. He stood there in the doorway, drenched from head to toe, his silver hair dripping rainwater onto the floor. His little chest rose and fell quickly as if he had been running. His pale hands clutched the small wooden bird tightly against his chest. "Aiden?" she gasped, hurrying toward him. "What happened?" "You're soaked." He looked up at her, his lips trembling but his eyes wide and desperate. Then, before she could ask again, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her waist. Ilara froze for a moment. Then she gently placed her hands on his back. The boy's body was cold, too cold. He shivered as though he had been walking through the storm for hours. She knelt down in front of him, brushing wet hair from his face. Hey, it's okay," she whispered softly. "You're safe now. Come inside." She took his hand and led him to the back of the diner where the heater was. She gave him a towel and helped dry his hair as best she could. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. The fear in his eyes said enough. "What happened, Aiden?" she asked quietly. "Where's your father?" The boy didn't answer. He just stared at the floor and shook his head. Ilara felt her heart twist painfully. Something was very wrong. After a while, she brought him a mug of warm milk and a slice of bread. He ate slowly, holding the wooden bird beside his plate. When he finished, he leaned against her arm, tired, small, and silent. Ilara smiled sadly. "You must have been so scared." The boy looked up at her, and for a moment she thought she saw words forming on his lips. But again, nothing came out. Just a faint breath. His silence felt heavier tonight. She wanted to protect him, but how could she when she didn't even understand what he was running from? Just as she was about to ask again, the bell above the door chimed sharply. Her heart jumped. Standing in the doorway was the tall man, Aiden's father. His eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, though not red this time, silver, cold as the moon. His coat was soaked and his face was pale with exhaustion. When his eyes fell on Aiden, a shadow of relief crossed his face. "You should not have run," he said quietly. Aiden flinched and stepped closer to Ilara, hiding slightly behind her. Ilara straightened, trying to stay calm. "He was scared," she said softly. "You shouldn't have let him wander alone in this weather." The man looked at her for a long moment. Then with a slow breath, he said, "You do not understand what follows us." "Then help me understand," she said, her voice steady but gentle. "Why does he never speak? Why do you come here only at night? And why does he look so afraid all the time?" The man's expression darkened. For a moment he said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy and thick. Then he whispered, "Because he was born into a curse, one that even I cannot break." Ilara frowned. "A curse?" The man slowly walked forward, his boots silent on the diner floor. He stopped at the window where the rain streaked the glass. His reflection looked ghostly in the dim light. "Long ago," he began quietly, "I ruled a land far from here, a kingdom hidden beneath the mountains, where the sun never touched. I was not like others. My people lived by the moon's light, not the day's. We thrived in darkness, and for centuries we believed that was our destiny." His voice was calm, but every word carried sorrow. Ilara listened in silence, hardly daring to breathe. "I was known as the Vampire King," he continued, "feared by many and loved by none. My power kept my people alive, but my pride..." His eyes fell to the floor. "My pride destroyed everything." He paused, looking toward Aiden, who watched him silently, tears in his eyes. "When Aiden was born," the man said softly, "the curse began. His mother, she was human. She loved me despite what I was, but my enemies used that love against us. They cast a spell on the child, a silence that would last until someone pure of heart showed him kindness without fear." Ilara's heart skipped. "Kindness without fear," she whispered. "You mean..." The man nodded. "Yes, you." Her breath caught in her throat. Me? But I've only spoken to him. I just cared. The man's expression softened, for the first time truly human. Sometimes, he said, that is all it takes to awaken what has been lost. Aiden moved closer to his father, tugging at his coat. His small hand trembled as he pointed at Alara, then touched his throat, as if trying to say something. His lips moved, but no sound came out. The man knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Not yet, my son," he murmured. "The curse weakens, but it has not broken." Alara knelt too, her eyes full of emotion. "He's trying," she said softly. "He's fighting it. I can see it in his eyes." The vampire king, for that was who he truly was, looked at her surprised. "You are not afraid of what I am?" She shook her head. "I don't care what you are. You're his father, and he's just a child. No child deserves to live in silence." For a moment the man stared at her as though he couldn't understand such words. In his long, lonely existence, kindness was something rare, something almost forgotten. "You speak like his mother," he said quietly. She too saw light where there was only shadow. A tear rolled down Aiden's pale cheek. Alara reached out and gently wiped it away. "You don't have to be alone anymore," she whispered. "Both of you." A sudden sound broke the moment. A low growl of thunder, but it wasn't from the storm outside. The lights flickered and a cold wind swept through the diner even though the doors were shut. The man stiffened. His eyes flashed red this time. "They found us," he whispered. Alara's heart raced. "Who? The ones who cursed him," he said. "They can sense when the silence weakens. They come to stop it from breaking." The room grew colder. The windows fogged instantly and the lights dimmed to a faint glow. Aiden clung to Alara's arm, terrified. The man turned to her quickly. "Stay behind me," he said firmly. "No matter what happens, do not let go of him." But before she could move, the air shimmered, and dark shapes began to form near the door, like shadows alive. Their whispers filled the room, low, cold, and cruel. Alara's hands shook, but she didn't step back. She held Aiden close, whispering, "It's okay. I'm here. I won't let them hurt you." The vampire king raised his hand and a faint light glowed from his palm, silver and soft like moonlight. The shadows hissed and pulled back. "Go," he said to her. "Take him. Leave now." But Aiden refused. He broke free from Alara's arms and ran to his father, grabbing his hand tightly. His lips moved again, desperate. He wanted to speak and needed to speak. Alara's heart pounded. She didn't understand what to do. "Aiden, please," she cried. "You can do it. You can speak. Say something." The boy's eyes filled with tears. He looked at her, then at his father. His small chest rose and fell as he tried. His lips parted, and this time a faint sound came out. Just one word, broken, weak, but real. "Father." The shadows shrieked. The sound seemed to burn them like fire. They vanished into smoke, leaving the diner silent again. Alara gasped, tears streaming down her cheeks. The man fell to one knee, his expression one of shock and awe. He reached out and touched his son's face gently. "You spoke," he whispered. Aiden smiled, small and tired, but brighter than any light in the room. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The storm outside softened and the wind died down. It was as if the whole world had stopped to listen. Finally, the man stood. "It has begun," he said quietly. "The curse is breaking." Alara looked at him, still trembling. "Does that mean he'll be free?" "Not yet," he said. "But the silence is fading. You gave him courage, and now they will come for you, too." She blinked in shock. "For me?" He nodded slowly. "Those who live in darkness do not forgive those who bring light." Alara looked down at Aiden, who clung to her hand tightly. She smiled through her fear. "Then they can come. I won't let go of him." The vampire king stared at her, a mortal woman standing against ancient darkness. And for the first time in centuries, he felt something stir inside him that he thought he had lost long ago. Hope. That night, when the storm finally ended, Alara locked the diner and watched the pair disappear into the mist. Aiden turned once to wave at her, holding the wooden bird tightly. She waved back, smiling sadly. Rain poured heavily that night, painting the streets of the quiet town in silver. The Moonshade Diner glowed softly through the storm, its warm lights flickering behind foggy windows. Alara stood inside, wiping down tables as thunder echoed in the distance. It was late, far past the usual hour when the mysterious pair would come. They hadn't appeared for 3 nights now. Alara felt a strange emptiness in her heart. She didn't understand why she missed them so much, but she did, especially the boy. His silver eyes, full of sadness and quiet longing, had left an imprint on her heart. She had spent the last few nights thinking about him, wondering if he was safe, if he was eating, if he was smiling somewhere. But deep down, she feared something was wrong. The last time they came, the Vampire King had looked troubled. His expression was darker, his gaze distant, as though he was fighting something inside himself. The boy had been quieter than usual, clutching the small wooden bird Alara had given him. That night when they left, the child had turned back to look at her once more, his eyes saying what his lips could not. Now, that image haunted her every time she closed her eyes. The rain grew heavier, beating against the roof like thousands of small drums. The diner was empty except for her. Alara sighed and leaned against the counter, lost in thought. She wondered if the boy would ever come back, or if their story had ended in silence forever. Then, suddenly, the door burst open. Alara jumped, her heart racing. A small figure stumbled inside, dripping wet and trembling from the cold. It was him, the silent boy. "Alara!" he cried out, voice trembling like a whisper in the storm. For a moment, she froze. Her mind couldn't believe what her ears had just heard. The boy had spoken. His voice was real, soft and young, but full of emotion. "Alara," he repeated, his eyes wide with fear. Without thinking, she ran to him and wrapped him in her arms. He was shaking badly, his clothes soaked, his small hands gripping her tightly as if he was afraid she might vanish. "You're safe now," she whispered, her heart pounding. "You're safe here." He looked up at her, tears mixing with raindrops on his pale cheeks. "He's coming," he said weakly. "My father. He's in danger." Alara knelt in front of him, brushing his wet hair away from his face. "What happened?" The boy shook his head, unable to explain through his tears. "He tried to protect me, but the others came. They said I broke the curse." "The curse?" Alara asked softly. He nodded. "When I spoke, the spell broke. But the ones who cast it, they felt it. They're angry now. They want to take me away again." Alara felt a chill run through her veins. She didn't know who they were, but she could see the fear in the boy's eyes. Whatever haunted him wasn't just a nightmare, it was real. Before she could speak again, the lights in the diner flickered. A cold wind rushed in through the door, and the air grew heavy with power. Then he appeared. The Vampire King stood in the doorway, tall and regal even in the storm. His black coat billowed like wings, and his crimson eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. But this time his face wasn't cold, it was full of pain and worry. "Alara," he said quietly, his voice deep and strained. "Thank you for keeping him safe." The boy ran to him at once, clutching his father's hand. "Father, I spoke. I called her name. I didn't mean to." The king knelt down, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. "You did nothing wrong," he said softly. "You broke the curse, my son. You set us free." Alara watched them, confused but moved by the gentleness in the king's tone. It was the first time she had ever heard warmth in his voice. "Free?" she asked, stepping closer. "What do you mean?" The king looked at her. His eyes, once sharp and distant, now held sorrow. "A long time ago," he began, "my son was cursed by those who despised me. They sealed his voice so he could never call me father again. The curse would only break if he spoke to someone who saw his heart, not his bloodline, not his title. Someone pure of soul." Alara's breath caught, and when he spoke to me, he nodded slowly. "The spell shattered, but the ones who cast it felt the change. They will come for him and for you." Thunder roared outside, shaking the windows. Alara looked at the boy who clung to his father's arm, terrified. "Then what do we do?" she asked. "Where can you go?" The king's eyes darkened. "Nowhere they cannot find us. But we will not run." He turned to her again, his expression serious but grateful. "You have shown my child kindness, something he has never known. You gave him a voice. For that I owe you a debt beyond words." Alara shook her head. "You don't owe me anything, I just wanted him to feel safe." The king smiled faintly, a small, rare thing that softened his face. "And that is why the curse broke. Kindness is a power even greater than magic." The boy reached for Alara's hand, his small fingers trembling. "Will they hurt you because of me?" he asked, his voice quiet and full of guilt. Alara squeezed his hand gently. No one will hurt me. Not while your father is here. The king rose to his full height. Indeed, they will not touch what is under my protection. Just then the air grew colder again. The lights flickered once more, and this time dark figures began to form in the shadows outside the diner. Their shapes were misty, their eyes glowing faintly like dying embers. The sound of whispering filled the air, soft and chilling. They're here, the king said quietly. Stay behind me! Alara stepped back, pulling the boy close. Her heart was pounding so fast she could barely breathe, but she refused to let fear show. The vampire king raised his hand and the room filled with a crimson light. His power surged like a wave, shaking the very floor. The shadows outside hesitated, hissing in anger. You cannot take him. The king's voice thundered. He has found his truth. Your curse is broken. The shadows shrieked, their forms twisting. The boy belongs to silence, they whispered. You cannot change fate. The king's eyes burned brighter. Fate bends to those who love. With a single motion, he released a blast of light that scattered the shadows like smoke in the wind. The diner trembled, and then silence fell again. When the light faded, the air was calm once more. The dark figures were gone. Alara looked around, breathing hard. The storm outside had stopped too. Moonlight shone through the window, soft and peaceful. The boy clung to his father's leg, trembling but smiling weakly. Father, are we safe now? The king knelt and hugged him close. Yes, my son. It is over. He looked up at Alara, gratitude shining in his eyes. You have done what no one else could. You reminded my child that he is not cursed, he is loved. Tears welled in Alara's eyes. I didn't do anything special, she said softly. I just listened. The vampire king shook his head. To listen with kindness is no small thing. You healed what centuries of power could not. The boy turned to Alara, his small face glowing with newfound warmth. You saved us, he whispered. Alara smiled gently, brushing a tear from his cheek. No, little one. You saved yourself when you found your voice. The king stood looking out the window at the peaceful moon. The curse is broken, but now the world will know of this change. My kind will not understand, but perhaps one day they will learn. He turned back to her, his expression soft. If you ever need me, Alara, call my name. Wherever I am, I will come. Then he placed a hand on his son's shoulder. It's time to go home. The boy hesitated, looking up at Alara. Can I come again? Alara knelt, smiling through her tears. Of course. There will always be a seat for you here. The boy's smile widened, pure and bright. For the first time, his eyes didn't look sad. They looked alive. The king nodded respectfully to her, his dark coat sweeping behind him as he turned to leave. Together, father and son stepped into the night, their figures fading under the soft moonlight. Alara stood by the door long after they were gone, her heart full and heavy all at once. The diner felt warmer now, as if their presence had left behind a piece of peace. She whispered softly to herself. He spoke, and the world changed. Outside, the clouds parted, revealing a full glowing moon, and somewhere far away the vampire king looked down at his child, who was humming a quiet tune, a song of freedom, of love, and of a voice finally found. She knew this wasn't the end, and it was only the beginning, because now the silence had been broken, and the world of shadows would not stay quiet for long. The morning light was soft and golden as it slipped through the clouds. For the first time in many nights, the town of Moonshade woke up to clear skies. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a fresh scent in the air. Inside the small diner, Alara stood by the window holding a cup of warm tea. Her eyes wandered to the empty table where the boy and his father once sat. The chairs were still in the same place, but the feeling of that corner had changed forever. It wasn't just a table anymore. It was a memory, a story, a reminder that even in a world filled with darkness, kindness could light a spark. 3 weeks had passed since that stormy night, the night the curse was broken. Since then, the vampire king and his son had not returned. Every evening, Alara still wiped that same table just in case they decided to come back. But the nights were quiet now, and yet her heart felt at peace. Because deep down, she knew they were safe. The town whispers rumors had started spreading through Moonshade. People spoke of strange lights seen near the forest, of a tall figure walking under the moon, of whispers that said the Night King had been freed. Some were afraid, but others told the story differently. They said a kind waitress had helped a lost child find his voice, and in doing so had softened the heart of a creature thought to be heartless. Alara didn't correct anyone. She only smiled whenever she heard the story. It felt strange to be the center of such tales, but she didn't mind. She didn't do it for glory. She did it because it was right. Still, sometimes when the diner grew quiet, she would look toward the woods and wonder if they remembered her, the boy with the silver eyes and the king with the shadowed heart. The return one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Alara heard the familiar chime of the diner door. Her heart skipped. When she turned, she saw him, the boy, standing in the doorway. He had grown a little taller, his hair slightly longer, but his smile was just as bright. And beside him stood the vampire king, dressed in simpler clothes this time, without his royal coat or cold mask of authority. Alara's eyes filled with tears before she could speak. "You came back," she whispered. The boy grinned, running to her. "I told you I would." She knelt to hug him tightly. "I missed you, little one." He laughed softly. "I missed you too." The king approached slowly, his steps quiet but sure. His eyes were calm now, no longer burning red but a soft shade of deep brown. "Alara," he said, bowing his head slightly. "I owe you my thanks once again. My son wished to see you." Alara smiled warmly. "You don't owe me anything, Your Majesty. I'm just happy to see you both safe." The king's lips curved into a faint smile. "Please call me Alden. I am not a king here, not only a father." The boy looked proud when his father said that. "Father has changed," he said excitedly. "He doesn't hide in the castle anymore. He helps people now." Alara blinked in surprise. "Really?" Alden nodded. "When the curse broke, I realized something. Power means nothing if it cannot protect or heal. For centuries, I ruled in fear, believing that strength came from silence and control, but I was wrong." He looked down at his son. "It comes from love, from connection, something you reminded me of." Ilara's eyes softened. "That's wonderful. The world needs more kindness, not more fear." The boy looked around the diner, his gaze landing on the small wooden bird she had once given him. It still sat on the shelf near the counter. "You kept it," he said softly. "Of course," Alara replied. "It reminds me that even the quietest hearts can sing when someone listens." The boy smiled shyly and touched the wooden bird. "I've been learning to carve too. Father says I have your patience," Alden chuckled lightly. "He spends hours shaping small animals from wood." "I suspect he's making an entire forest," Alara laughed. "That's wonderful. Maybe one day you'll fill your home with them." The boy tilted his head. "Will you come see them?" Alara hesitated, touched by the question. "If you want me to." "I do," he said quickly. "Father said we could visit sometimes." "He says you're our friend." Alara's smile widened. "That makes me very happy." The gift later that night, as they sat together in the diner, Alden placed something on the table, a small, shining crystal pendant. It glowed faintly in the light as if it held a piece of moonlight inside. "This is for you," he said. Alara shook her head. "You don't need to give me anything." "It is not payment," Alden said gently. "It is protection. Should you ever find yourself in danger, hold it and whisper my name. I will come, no matter how far." She hesitated, then took the pendant carefully. "Thank you, Alden. I'll treasure it." The boy added shyly, "I helped make it. It's from the crystals in our cave. They glow brighter when someone kind touches them." Alara laughed softly. "Then it will shine very bright because it came from you." The boy beamed, proud of himself. They talked for a long time that night. Alden told her stories of his world, the hidden lands of the night creatures, the ancient forests, the silent mountains where he once ruled alone. But his stories were not cold or dark anymore. They were gentle, filled with wonder and peace. Alara listened, her heart full. She realized that behind the name Vampire King was simply a man who had once forgotten what it meant to feel. The dawn of change weeks passed, and their visits became frequent. The boy loved helping Alara in the diner. He wiped tables, arranged flowers, and even served warm milk to the few customers who came late at night. The townspeople grew used to seeing him, though they didn't know who he really was. Alden would sit quietly by the window, watching his son laugh, his once cold heart now at ease. He no longer looked like a creature from legend. He looked like a father finally at peace. Under his guidance, the hidden world of vampires also began to change. The cruel ones who believed in power and fear started to fade, while new clans rose that valued peace with humans. The curse's end had not only freed his son, it had softened the whole kingdom. And it all began with a waitress who dared to speak to a silent child. The farewell one evening, as the first snow began to fall, Alden entered the diner alone. The boy was not with him this time. His eyes were calm but distant. "Ilara," he said softly, "we must return to our realm for a time. My son needs to learn about his heritage, and I must ensure the peace we have built stays strong." Ilara nodded slowly, though her heart ached a little. "I understand." "He wished to come tonight," Alden continued, "but he fell asleep waiting. He made you this." He handed her a small box. Inside was a wooden carving, a bird much like the first one, but this one had its wings open as if ready to fly. Ilara smiled through her tears. "He's improved so much." "He said it is you," Alden said gently. "Because you helped him find his wings." She pressed the bird to her heart. "Tell him I'll always be here, and that I'm proud of him." Alden nodded. "He knows, and he will return one day, when the dawn and night meet again." Ilara tilted her head. "What does that mean?" He smiled faintly. "When the world is ready to see that light and darkness can live side by side." She smiled sadly. "Then I'll keep the diner open until that day." Alden bowed slightly. "Thank you, Ilara, for everything." Then he turned and left, disappearing into the snow. The promise of morning years passed. The story of the mysterious boy became a quiet legend in Moonshade. Some said he was a lost prince, others said he was a spirit saved by kindness. Ilara grew older, but her heart remained just as warm. The diner still stood, its windows glowing softly in the night, always open for travelers who needed a little light in their darkness. Every night, she placed the wooden bird with open wings on the counter beside the glowing crystal. Together they shone faintly, reminders of a bond that went beyond time. And sometimes, when the moon was full and the night calm, she could swear she heard laughter outside, the soft, familiar voice of a child, calling her name from somewhere in the wind. "Ilara," she would smile, whisper back, "I hear you." Because once, a long time ago, she had spoken to a silent child, and that small act of kindness had changed not just one life, but two worlds forever.